Hello friends and welcome. Today we're going to do a quick rundown of the best support items you should be thinking about every game, which I know they're all unique. Heroes want different things. So I do recommend you go check out like what pros are building on your hero, kind of like prioritize that. This is more of a general discussion on pros and cons of items you'll see the most at high level games, and maybe we'll tone it down for our pubs a little bit as well. Before I lose your attention, let's talk about what I consider some of the like top tier support items. So one is Blood Grenade. I won't talk about it too much since we've done it in other videos, but it's just all around solid. The health is fine to tank up. I've seen some discussion about like holding 2 or 3 just for like the health, and maybe there's some cool backpack efficiency stuff. That's not really why they're popular right now. Maybe in the future. Really, it's about this throw grenade active, which helps you find these early game kills either before the game even begins, right, with the bounty runes, or in the early laning stage. The slow and the damage are just really strong in the early game. Now, eventually, people level up, start picking up items, and the blood grenades drop off. It's hard for me to say when that is, but I frequently go like 1 to 2 blood grenades, sometimes like 3 to 4. If they like keep working, then like, they pay for themselves. But they are consumables, so as soon as you start thinking like, I don't really need blood grenades to get kills, or I get them and we're still not getting kills because we're the weaker team, then start investing your money in something else besides the blood grenade. But you will typically find some value from them in the early game, and especially in your brackets. I know people are making positioning mistakes, right, in the lower ones, so they step up too far, hit them with the blood grenade, attack them with 2 heroes, with the creeps, right? You might pick up a kill even though you think you're the weaker lane. So really good item. Let's move on to Solar Crest. So the build up for Solar Crest is really easy. All the items are relatively cheap. You can get something like Sage's Mask, Blightstone for like attacking in the laning stage sometimes. If you're a good hero for that, you get the Medallion for pretty cheap, 1,025. Like stats, pretty solid, especially this mana regen. And then the armor you can start using. It's free to use too. You can use it to like stack. But then you get the Solar Crest. Again, cheap build up to finally finish the Solar Crest. Stats, fine. Like they're good. They're not like amazing, mind-blowing. The mana regen's actually pretty solid. They're all things we're happy with as a support. It's really about this active, this 7 armor, 70 attack speed, and 18% movement speed that you're either going to buff your target with or debuff the enemy with. Right now, those are all just really good for these early active plays. And as the game scales mid to late game, right, I'm not going to complain giving my carry 70 extra attack speed and kiting potential with the move speed in the late game, right? That's what they need. So the Solar Crest is really good, and it's so good that you'll see 2 on the same team in some matches at the pro level. You don't have to have 2, 1 can be enough, but if it's a really good game for Solar Crest, 2 allows you to have permanent uptime because it now has a 50% uptime. You can take turns. First you use yours, and then the ally, whoever else has it, the other support, sometimes the offlaner builds it, they use theirs. Don't stack because you don't get any extra benefits. It just kind of like refreshes the 8-second duration. So make sure you go one and then the other, or what might be a little easier, use it aggressively. So one person uses it defensively on your carry, and then the other person uses it aggressively on the enemy carry, and that way there's a massive swing in these stats. And when it comes down to like a right-click fight to the death in the mid to late game, then it helps to have the Solar Crest on your ally, or at least debuffing the enemy. And the enemy team will probably do the same thing, actually. They might also buy 1 or 2. You might see it like break even. There's just like a bunch of Solar Crest icons on people, but it's not doing anything. I mean, at that point, that's fine, right? But ideally, you'll at least be on the winning side or even side of this like Solar Crest exchange. So I think the buildup is great and the active is awesome. Oh, and I should mention real quick, when you're not going to buy it, illusion heroes don't really like this because it does pop the little icon over the head. It's not very good to use on your like PL, your Naga Sirens, stuff like that. So if that's the case, you may not buy it unless your mid or your offlaner can make use of it, and then you can use the Solar Crest aggressively, right? So like you use it on the target and your PL just like surrounds them with illusions. That's fine, but you're just probably not going to use it on your carry. So in those cases, you may not get the Solar Crest, or if your team is very spell damage focused and they're just not right-clicking a lot, then the Solar Crest does drop in value. But usually there's someone who right-clicks, right? It's usually the carry. Usually there's at least one person, but you may delay it. So like anti-mage, he's not going to join fights early. You don't really need to Solar Crest him. Whereas your mid and your offlaner, maybe they're more spell-focused. You don't need the Solar Crest right now. But maybe you pick it up after an item or two when the anti-mage is going to join fights and you want to start putting it on him. So that can be another consideration. Or if you just think other items are better, then that's also okay. But Most games will have some value for the Solar Crest, including Roshan, which is harder to kill now. This is quite nice. Then we have one of the new items, Pavis. The stats are all pretty solid. This mana regen is some of the best you can get for this price. 1,400 gold is really cheap compared to like Aether Lens or Yules, which are much more expensive and also give 2.5 regen. So Pavis, very nice for that. And then you have this active. So 300 physical damage shield. It's not going to work against magic or pure damage, but it will work against attacks and physical damage spells. 300 shield is a lot in the early game. It could be like a 33% increase in effective health, so that's great. And now that it calculates damage reductions, which I think it was supposed to, it's probably just bugged, but it is calculating that, which means in the mid to late game, when you use it on like your carry with like 30 armor, he's making that 300 shield go even further with those reductions. So it's nice that this cheap item is really powerful early, and you know, there's probably better items mid to late, but you've already got it, so it's like it's still useful mid to late. Eventually you may replace it if the game goes late enough, you're rich enough, then you know, that's fine. But many supports don't ever get to that point because we're kind of poor, so it's nice to have this cheap item we get. It's great for like the whole time we have it. You can get multiple, just like the Solar Crest. It's not as common though. It's more of a like one-time purchase typically. This will also not stack. So if you have two Pavises, don't both use it at the same time. You'll still only have a 300 shield and just refresh the time. And you'll like refresh the shield if it like started to go down, but you won't get to like a 600 shield or anything. So the most it can be at is 300, so only use it like one and then the other. But a part of the reason like you don't need two is because you can just make this one Pavis better. So like it combos with the Solar Crest. So if you Solar Crest someone and then Pavis them, then they're getting this extra armor, and that extra armor is increasing the value of this 300 shield. In the same way, like if you have the Pavis and then you get the Solar Crest, like it's working that way too. Like the armor from the Solar Crest is more valuable because there's a 300 shield from the Pavis. So these items go really well together, which also leads us to our third top tier item, or our fourth, I guess, if you... I kind of include the blood grenades, but they're kind of different, right? They're consumables compared to these. The last one is Drums of Endurance, because right now there's a lot of early grouping, and the stats, they're fine, but it's really about this extra move speed and attack speed that you get. So like, hey, I want to kill that guy, let's go like boom, and then we all run and we go like beat the shit out of the guy, right? And the nice thing about that is when you Solar Crest them, then you get to like do a lot of damage in that time before the Solar Crest or the medallion fades. Or like, okay, I'm shielding you, you've got 8 seconds with this extra tankiness, let's kill him in that time, you know? So these three items feel like they really combo well together, and they're all good individually, and that's why to me they're like at the best tier of support items. And so when you can get all of them, or at least a couple of them, it feels really good. Drums, by the way, the build-up's nice, and something I want to say, this Boots of Bearing, if you need this 1.5 second immunity to slows, like against a Warlock or a Venomancer, going Drums straight into Boots of Bearing is fine, but this recipe is kind of expensive, 1,700 gold, literally more expensive than the Pavis. If you only need like that burst, like the attack speed and the movement speed, and it's not so much about like dealing with slows, I kind of recommend, you know, get the Drums, pick up another item, and then finish the Boots of Bearing. I see a lot of you go like straight Drums to Boots of Bearing, and you still have like 5 charges on the drum because you got like a kill or two, and you're like, oh, I got a lot of gold, let me just finish the Boots of Bearing. It feels a little wasteful because the active itself is not that much better, right? From 45 attack speed to 50, and then from 13% movement speed to 15%. The overall stats are better for you, like your Tranquil Boots can't be canceled, like that's cool, but in terms of like enabling your team, the upgrade from Drums to Boots is not that much unless it's about that spell or that slow immunity. So if you don't need that, think about buying a different item before like finishing this Boots of Bearing. So now to go through all the other support items real quick to make this video not take too long. Let's start with items that are good still, just maybe a little step down from those other ones we talked about. Things like Force Staff, perfectly fine if you need it. Just all around useful, general utility on the forced movement, but particularly good against like Slark and Clockwork, those kind of heroes, or like you got to kite some of these melee cores, then Force Staff is really good. Glimmer Cape against magic damage, still a really solid choice. Magic resistance for yourself, a barrier for the target, which could be yourself as well. This is also very nice because pipes are really common, and there's some neutrals. BKB increases magic resistance, so then that barrier becomes more valuable. The invis is still useful, right? Still an escape option, but a little worse than it used to be because of Dust of Appearance, the buff it got. Glimmer, like, you kind of know where they are, right? They get glimmered in front of you, so you know they're there, you just need detection, and that's when, like, Dust is really good. Sentries did get nerfed, but I don't think that's a major buff to Glimmer Cape because of the way, like, you use them. Compared to a hero like Bounty Hunter or Nyx or Clinks, you don't know where they are, and that's why you, like, need sentries down in the fight to see, like, when they show up, or just, like, on your map so you know where they are. Glimmer, because it's only like a 5-second duration, it's not usually like, oh, he could be anywhere on the map. It's like, nah, he's probably visible most of the time, and only when he uses the Glimmer, he's invis, and that's what Dust is really good against. It's the main counter to Glimmer, and Dust is better than ever. It's still useful, it's still nice to force him to buy detection, but mainly I buy Glimmer because I need magic resistance, or I need to save my team from magic damage, and then the invisibility is a nice addition. It's not like, damn, I need invis, I'm gonna buy Glimmer. It's the magic resistance. Aether Lens and Blink also fulfill their specific role. So, like, if you need cast range, Aether Lens is really the only thing you can buy. It is technically nerfed that it no longer builds into Octarine, but many supports never ever got to that point anyway, so it doesn't really matter for us as much, but technically still a nerf. If you need cast range, this is your best bet, so there you go. Blink Dagger, kind of also, you need instant initiation. You don't really got another option. It's a Blink Dagger. And it's damn good at what it does. So as long as you need, that instant initiation, that cast range, you need that forced movement, that magic resist, then these are your options, and they're all really good. But if you don't need them, they have less, like, general value, less build-up value, because, like, all of these are kind of hard, right? Arcane Boots into Energy Booster, sure, for the disassemble, but then Voidstone 700, which is, like, not the worst, but, like, a recipe of 775, like, this is the best build-up, but it's not, like, the easiest. Force Staff, 1,000 gold component, 950 recipe, Glimmer, 1,000 gold Shadow Amulet, 800 Cloak, Blink, the whole Blink. The buildup is not as easy. You don't get that, like, stepping stone value compared to these other items. These have synergy together, whereas these, you'll use them together, but it's not like, the armor buffing up the shield, all of that, So I think these are all, like, decent items. You'll see them a lot, but a little less, especially if you can get, like, that team play. To me, these feel more meta, but granted, in your pub games, you may not have that active play, and if you're losing that, then these items drop in value a little bit compared to what you'll see at, like, the pro level, and that's when, like, yeah, I'm just gonna go first item Force Staff. Like, it's safer. Technically, I could get, Medallion, Solar Crest, Drums, but, like, my team's not gonna do anything. They're all gonna farm. Then, yeah, at that point, they're all on the same tier. But I do think, like, because these are so cheap, especially, like, Pavis Medallion, I would still consider them better. Along that tier, I would also consider Gem of True Sight is better than it used to be because of the bigger map, but also heroes like Clinks, Bounty Hunter, Nyx, Mirana, and I feel like there's one more, but I'm currently forgetting, so whatever. Many Invis heroes are popular right now, and they're pretty good, so Gem is pretty solid against them. Again, keep in mind your pubs. You need to, like, play together once you buy the gem. You can't lose it, otherwise it's literally griefing yourself. You're spending money to then give it to the enemy team. So if you're not, like, with a team that's going to play together, then even if it's a good gem game, I'm kind of hesitant. But from, like, Ancient onwards, people should be good enough to, like, kind of know they need to do that. But of course, every game's unique. Even in the lower brackets, if your team's, like, communicating, like, hey, okay, let's do it. Like, I think it's better than it was before, but I understand it's not easy to make this work in pubs for certain brackets. An item like Lotus, I think, is still really good in the right situations. The buildup is not very nice for supports, besides the fact that you can disassemble the energy booster. These components are all kind of expensive to get to, but it's not the worst in the world. And then the Lotus is really nice. I don't really go first item Lotus. It's kind of hard to explain why, but I think it's, like, the buildup. The buildup is just really awkward for the Lotus. It's better in, like, the mid to late game as a second or third or later item. So you don't really need to rush it, but when it is a good Lotus game, like the Dispel especially, is nice for yourself or for allies. Lotus is pretty solid. Compared to, like, Yule's, which has dropped off. Yule's does have a Dispel for yourself, but you're also, self-disabled for 2.5 seconds, so that's kind of awkward. Same if you want to use it aggressively, like, okay, I dispelled him, but we also can't hit him for 2.5 seconds. I think that's why Yules has dropped off a little bit. You can kind of buy these intelligence, movement speed, mana regen stats from other items. So unless the 2.5 seconds is not an issue for you, or you want that, like Ursa, like, oh, I want to control him for 2.5 seconds, he can't do anything in his ult, like, that's when Yules feels better to me. Otherwise, like, I kind of don't want it that much unless I really want the basic Dispel or I want, like, the late game Wind Waker. I'd rather get, like, something else besides Yules typically. Holy Locket's another one that's dropped off. I think it's just less reliable than these other items, especially the barrier. So, like, this energy charge, okay, similar purpose, if not arguably better, because health and mana, that works against all damage types, and you amplify it. But you need 20 charges. So the question is, like, how frequently can you get 20 charges, especially considering, like, Pavis is 18 seconds, Glimmer is 12 seconds. Like, you can keep using these. Yes, there's a mana cost, so that part's kind of, like, annoying, and Holy Locket doesn't have a mana cost. But, like, okay, 3 charges, next 13 seconds, 5 charges, like, it's a little awkward compared to, like, having guaranteed full barrier every time. Now, the passive, I think, is why some heroes still buy it, like Io and Witch Doctor on occasion. Even they are favoring, like, other things like Mech and Pavis and stuff. But sometimes I do see them build Holy Locket, and that's when they're confident healing is all they need, and so they want to amp it. And you always get this healing benefit, and I think that's when Holy Locket is best. But for the price, I think other items are more reliable. Ghost Scepter, I think, it pales in comparison to Pavis. It is a more difficult build-up by far, 1,500 gold all in one purchase. The stats overall, like, not as good as Pavis. The Ghost form is superior in the fact that you cannot take physical damage, attacks, or spells, so that's good, but you do take magic amp, so you could still be killed by spells even easier, and you can only use it on yourself rather than your allies, whereas Pavis you can easily use on anyone, and it's very nice. So although Pavis is, like, the lesser option against physical damage, it's just far easier, way more utility in my opinion for the price than Ghost Scepter. So if you can, get Pavis, but some games you don't have the option. Like PA daggering you, crit will kill you through Pavis. So you still need, like, a Ghost Scepter. It's, like, still your best bet to survive in those situations. But I would honestly maybe buy both. I'd buy Pavis first and then Ghost Scepter. And this will give you more early game value. You can use it still on your allies as the game goes, and this will be your own personal protection. Another benefit of Ghost Scepter is that you can build it into the E-Blade later on. It's not very common, but it is very strong. Same with Wind Waker against heroes like Elsie, Winter Wyvern's Curse, Chronosphere. The enemies buy BKBs, and then it's like, oh, I can't do anything against them. And E-Blade and Wind Waker are a way you can save your allies in a more powerful sense than, like, oh, here's a little bit more barrier, here's a little bit more heal, but, like, the enemy still kills them, right? Like, I literally protect you from physical damage, or, like, I lift you out. They're very late game options that are very strong in those situations, and so if you know you want that, that gives more value to, like, an earlier Yules and Ghost Scepter, but maybe just don't get that point by building cheaper items and getting ahead early. That's kind of like the safer way. So good, but kind of like niche situations. Auras are still really good, but offlaners tend to buy them. So I'm mainly talking about Guardian Greaves, Crimson, and Pipe. They're all solid, but the earlier you get them, the better they are. And so supports farm slower than offlaners. If you can choose, have the offlaner buy them. Sometimes the offlaners don't buy them. So if you think a particular aura is very strong in a game, then as a support, you can build them. Greaves are the most common. So, like, because you get Arcane Boots naturally and Mech's really easy to build, Greaves is then a natural extension of that. Plus, because these are easy to buy, you, like, start getting the value pretty early, Let's kind of ignore the Arcane Boots because I think you'd get that on your own, right? Like, Mech within 1,800 gold, you start getting the Mech, and that's a big part of the Greaves. And then later on, you get the Dispel and the Aura, and that's kind of nice. Compare that to, like, Pipe, though. Pipe's the second most common aura supports might buy, but the buildup is worse because you want this as early as possible if it's a good Pipe game, because that's when the spells are the most impactful. So the faster you can get the Pipe, the better, but supports farm slowly, and there's no, like, midway point. You have to finish the 3,375 gold. Sure, you can get the cloak for yourself, and, like, sure, you get value from these, but it is not the same as a finished Pipe, whereas, like, a Mech is, like, bargain bin Greaves, for a much cheaper price, so like the build-up makes sense. It doesn't feel as bad for a support to be going Greaves compared to the pipe. Then there's Crimson Guard, which supports, they don't typically need the Vanguard as much, and they don't have the same levels and items, so they don't get the bonus strength going into the Crimson Guard block effect that offlaners would. So melee 4s sometimes build Crimson, like Bounty, I'll see him. And Bounty actually doesn't care. He'll build all these auras. But typically, for a lot of supports, Guarding Greaves is like the main aura you're willing to buy, and then Pipe, and then Crimson. But if you can get your offlaner to do it, that's better, because they'll hit the timings, and they'll be more effective with them typically than you will. And you can then go other stuff. So like, your core builds Guardian Greaves, and you buff that heal with the Solar Crest armor. Or like, the armor from Guardian Greaves then makes Pavis better. Or like, Glimmer plus Pipe. Cores will not really build these items we're talking about. That's why this is a support item video, right? Maybe the Solar Crest, I'd say, is the most common. But like, that's why we'd prefer the offlaners to build them, because the timing is better, and then we can combo it with our own items. Aeon Disc is pretty meh. If you're a support who has like a super powerful spell, like a Silencer, that you're like, oh, I just have to get this off without dying, then sure. But the cooldown is super long, and it can even be dispelled. So I don't really like Aeon Disc right now. I think it's just way too long cooldown. I'd much rather see lower cooldown spells, which like go, early to mid game. If you do reach that mid to late game part and it's all about just winning a couple fights here and there, then Aeon Disc does start to get in value. But I hate to see any kind of first, second, even like third item Aeon Disc. Maybe third item's okay, but I really want it to be one of the later items the supports gets, because every time it goes, the cooldown gets longer, the stats are not all that useful. It's only if you really need this passive, because you really need like one particular spell to get off. And that situation is just not very common right now. It's more about these low cooldown, buff people up, let's fight a lot kind of items. Speaking of aggressive plays, there are some items for that, like Phylactery. Now, this wasn't very popular, then everyone trying it. I think it's on the downside again. The stats are like okay in terms of like tanking up and mana pool, but for an item that encourages frequent low cooldown spell costs, the mana regen is really bad. It's 0.7 for the price, which, reminder, Pavis 2.5, 1,400 gold. So that part makes it a little awkward that only some, like, you have to fit several things. You need a low cooldown spell, you need like enough mana regen naturally or from other items, and you need to not need other things, right? Like, your job needs to be damage, which as a support is not usually the case. But some people, like Skywrath, I've seen build it. I've seen Banes build it. Like, when you're focused on, like, I just want to kill them, I bring damage, I bring the slow, 50% slow. It's pretty powerful, even though it's only 1.5 seconds, and I don't really need mana. Then Phylactery is kind of nice, but supports tend to, like, do other things, and, like, these other items cover those a bit better than Phylactery. Spirit Vessel, I don't think is very good right now. Now, I know here, like, Alchemist is very popular, but even against him, I sometimes see games where, like, we're opting for other things, because the issue with Spirit Vessel, especially for supports, is it's online very slow. Again, very expensive item, and you want it early before the dispels come in, so that part's already awkward. Next, the stats, not actually very good for the cost of this item. Earn, great. Cheap, easy to build. Spirit Vessel, 1,000 gold, 11,000 or 1,100. It's very awkward to me. And then this item has a drop off, which is like, once the enemy picks up dispels, this item is like borderline useless. So it's a very expensive item with a limited window that is very powerful in a specific situation. That makes it less easy to use, compared to like another way to shut down Alchemist or Huskar is to be able to kill them straight up through regen, through like solar cresting, drums active, stuff like that. Or close out his map so he can't farm. Like, maybe we can't kill him, but we're taking his towers, we're killing his teammates, and we're restricting the places he can farm. We're moving faster towards him with these auras, we're killing people faster, we're staying healthy to keep being active. Like, that is a more general approach to countering these heroes, and it's easier and scales better than the Spirit Vessel. So I really don't see a lot of Spirit Vessels nowadays. I think it's just not as good, which another item kind of in that vein is Veil of Discord. I'm kind of surprised by. I thought would be more popular, and you will see some supports buy it who are having a good game and offer a lot of spell damage, like Silencer, and then your team has a lot of spell damage. It's good for the early game, but I think the issue with it is that mid to late game, you can dispel the Veil of Discord. You can be immune to spells to a certain extent with like BKBs, magic resistances, stuff like that. So I think there's like, it's good early, but then meh, mid to late. Compared to Solar Crest, which is like, it's going to be good early, mid, and late. You're right. If the enemy has dispels, you can use it on your own course. It feels easy to use it, even though there's a lot of like strong spellcasters right now, which is why I thought Veil would be more popular. But I think just the situations where it lines up is less the case. But if you do think like, oh, we have a lot of strong spells, like I still see it. It's fine to buy. I just think these are more common to get frequently. Midas and Dagon kind of grease. Midas if you're Ogre, okay. Dagon if you're Nyx, that's fine. For every other support, it's probably not really the time. These other items are lower cooldown, faster, more reliable, and just all around better. For some niche, like weirder items that might be good for you, Atos, I've never really liked on supports, but I think it's better than it's ever been for universal heroes, because you actually get a lot of value from these stats now. Crowns are cheap, easy to build, and then like the next parts are hard. But like then you have the Atos, which is good against mobile heroes, and you can make use of all these stats for the damage on a hero like Mirana. So I'm kind of more open to it than I used to be. Orchid, I think, is really good in certain games. Heroes like Clinks and Clockwork, I've seen get it when they're having a good game, but the buildup is awkward. You don't really get much value until you finish the whole item. So not very common at all. What else? Halberd, I think, as a mid to late game item for certain supports, pretty solid. Specifically this Disarm. It's one of the few things that can't be dispelled. So it's very powerful. Against a hero like Ursa, against these heroes who are like being super buffed up by like Solar Crest drums, right? Trying to power up our Slark, Ursa, Medusa, Alchemist, heroes like that. And then you're like, disarm, haha. And even without the disarm, you're just tankier and have evasion. So I think this can have its place in the mid to late game for certain supports. Hex is really good in the late game. The stats, I mean, they're fine, but it's really about the active, right? The instant disable, preventing the enemy from doing anything, is very powerful. So if you're getting to that late point, this one's good. Nullifier, you may have seen that little clickbait bit in the thumbnail. This is not what supports usually build, and you're probably not buying it for the damage. Clinks is like the only one who can reasonably build this early to mid game and make full use of this. The reason I'm mentioning it here for supports, though, is that the constant dispels are like one of the counters to all the items I've talked about. All the barriers, all the auras, the aura actives, they can all be dispelled by Nullifier. And it's better than like a Yule's, because Yule's you dispel and it's once. And if they apply more stuff, you can't do anything about it. The Nullifier keeps going. So in that time frame of 5 seconds, you might be able to kill them, and they can't really like do anything with all these support items they've bought. If you've entered the mid to late game, I see your pubs, like they go really late. You get a lot of farm. You might consider Nullifier if you think this is an issue. Like, oh, we just can't kill this guy through his Aeon Disc, his Crimson. By the way, actually, Aeon dispels Nullifier, but if the Aeon pops first, then you can Nullifier that off. So they kind of counter each other, just depending when it happens. But like, there's a lot of items here that make the game difficult, and then this just removes a lot of them. So this is a really good item that cores are probably going to buy, but on some supports, mainly Clinks, but others into the ultra late game might consider. I just wanted to throw it out for you. Ag Shard, you're kind of hoping that you'll get from the Tormentor, Aghanim Scepter, different supports buy it. I don't really feel the need to talk about it too much. If it's good, you can get it. If not, don't get it. BKB is not as common. Not that it was super common on supports, but some, like you're doing work, I get the BKB. BKB overall kind of nerfed, so kind of opting for these other items instead, which are lower cooldown, easier to use, and still make you strong, but there are still cases where you need the BKB, then it's fine to get. Okay, I'm going to stop myself here because this video is already kind of long, and it'll just keep getting longer. If you guys really want like a 5-hour discussion on every single item, let me know. Maybe we'll do it on something else. But if you haven't already, try Pavis and Solar Crest at the least. Oh, and the Blood Grenade. I'd say those 3 are really good, and you'll see them in a lot of games. Open like any pro match, you'll find these items in them. Drum's a little more situational, but still generally very strong. And then, yeah, you heard my explanation for the others. So if you found this helpful, I'm glad. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in another video.